Hey, SBC 205, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, whatever time you are consuming this piece of educational media. Welcome back to our online lecture series. Today we are going to be talking about persuasive speaking. How to convince people to do something they may not have wanted to do to begin with. That's how we define persuasive speaking. I'm going to cut through all, this is an online lecture, so we're going to make it tight. We're going to make it keep it moving. So first of all, let's discuss a difference between two things that are oftentimes confused. Okay? The difference between persuasion and coercion. All right? A lot of time these things are confused, and I'm going to want to keep them very separate today. All right? We're going to talk more about coercion a little bit later on in the process, but right off the bat, I want to establish that we're not doing coercion in this class. Coercion is seeking to change someone's attitudes through threats or force. So pretending this is a gun, it's an unloaded marker, so I can use it safely. Someone walks up to you and says, "Give me all your money, or I'll kill you," and you give them their money. Did you persuade them into giving you their money? No, you coerce them. You threaten to kill them. That doesn't really leave a choice for them. So there's no real persuasion. Persuasion, though, is a legitimate effort. Remember, persuasion is primarily a legitimate effort to affect others' attitudes through providing them, the audience, with information so they can modify their own behavior, attitudes, and beliefs. A legitimate effort that allows the audience to modify their own behavior, attitudes, and belief. So the first step to building a persuasive speech is audience analysis. That was our last lecture, okay? If you don't know their initial disposition, okay, you don't know what you need to persuade them of. If they agree with you, you need to intensify their attitudes. If they disagree with you, you need to change their attitudes. If they're doing the behavior you want, you need to strengthen that behavior, okay? But you need to make sure you know where you're coming from first, or where they're coming from first. If they're neutral, it's for one of two reasons. There's only two possible reasons. If you're there to persuade them, there's only two possible reasons why they could be neutral. First of all, number one, they are uninformed. Uninformed. Okay? All right? And the other reason is they're unconcerned. Can it be both? Sure. How many times have we heard, "I don't know and I don't care"? Okay? So what you need to do is if they agree with you, you need to intensify it. If they're neutral, you need to inform them. And if they disagree, okay, you have to change their mind. And that will depend on your personal credibility. Okay? Disagree. It's based on credibility. And the easiest and quickest way to build your credibility, okay, is acknowledge the fact that you don't agree already. They know that. They know why you're there. They know what you're trying to give them and what you're trying to convince them of. So be honest and acknowledge up front that, hey, we probably don't agree on this. Okay? Don't be afraid to acknowledge your disagreements. It can also show you're open-minded and unafraid of the opposition. So acknowledging the fact that you don't agree with them strengthens your position right off the bat. Hey, listen, I'm not going to shy away from the fact that we have completely different attitudes about how fertilizers are used and how it's impacting the Clark Hill Reservoir. That's what we're going to talk about today, and I'm going to convince you that those fertilizers can be used, but we can probably use them in smaller amounts. Okay? That would be an example. So let's talk about some arguments. Ways to build arguments. We've already kind of discussed the problem-solution speech, but let's go with some other arguments and ways to build persuasive arguments. The first is inductive reasoning. Okay? And inductive reasoning takes broad generalizations from very specific answers. The way it's thought about is from one to many. Okay? Basically, there is data, the conclusions are drawn from the data. Okay? So this is where I would say, hey, listen, I met a guy from Aiken County once, and he was dropped out of high school in 10th grade. All right? So everybody from Aiken County dropped out of high school in 10th grade. Okay? That's an extreme, and we'll talk about what the problem with that is. But a lot of times it's not just a person. It can also be one or the few to the many. Now, we see this all the time in public opinion polling. All right? So they will interview 1,900 people and tell us how 330 million people in the United States feel. 1,900 is few, 330 million is many, so that will give you an inductive reasoning. Okay? The second is reasoning by analogy. And that is 1 to 1. Okay? That's perceived similarities are used as a basis to infer some further similarity that is not yet observed. Okay, that's to say, if we believe that A and B are similar in 1, 2, 3, and they probably are similar in 4. So Aiken County, South Carolina, and Marshall County, Alabama, which is a rural county north of Birmingham, they have similar income rates, they have similar education levels, they have similar insured healthcare insurance levels. So we can assume that they probably have similar rates of people who smoke. That fourth thing isn't necessarily directly tied to the other three, but we make the leap that since Marshall County and Aiken County are so similar in so many ways, they're probably similar in all ways. Okay? And then finally, there is deductive reasoning. Okay? And deductive reasoning is going from the many to the one. Okay? The many to the one. The most basic form is called a syllogism. And it goes all the way back to Aristotle. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. It is the most basic argument of logic ever taught. But how big of a sample do we need before we can say we've accounted for all the outliers? Okay? A lot of times, deviations will pop up. Okay? For instance, I am a Caucasian male in my late 50s, and I live in Columbia County, Georgia. Okay? Based on the reaction I get from some of my neighbors, they make a generalization. They use reasoning by deductive. They make their assumptions based on deductive reasoning. Since every Caucasian male in his late 50s in Columbia County, Georgia, they've met, has certain political beliefs, they deductively reason that I would also have those political beliefs. So when people talk to me about politics, when I'm at home over in lovely Grovetown, Georgia, people are really shocked when they hear me talk, and they're like, wait, hold on a minute. And they're very confused sometimes with how I engage them on political subjects. Okay? That is, and we're going to talk about what that fallacy is, okay, to deal with those deviations. So there are problems with each of these. Okay? The problem with inductive reasoning is called a hasty generalization. Okay? So a hasty generalization is where you see one person, okay? The first apple I took out of this box is bad. So I just throw the whole box away because apparently one bad apple does spoil the whole box, okay? Therefore, 4 out of 5 dentists recommend Happy Glossy Smiley toothpaste. Therefore, it must be great. Well, we don't know how many they asked. They may have only asked 4 dentists, okay? My father smoked 4 packs of cigarette a day since age 14 and lived until 69. Therefore, smoking really can't be all that bad for you. And I've had members of my family tell me that. Okay? I had an uncle. I told you all about my uncle. He lived to 96. He smoked almost his entire life until the emphysema and black lung disease put him on oxygen 24 hours a day, and he didn't want to catch on fire. But I have many members of that side of my family that smoke, and they say, well, your uncle lived to 96. Yeah, but my uncle couldn't get out of his recliner for the last 15 years of his life. So, going into my family again. Okay, so that is a hasty generalization that you can take one example and assume it applies to everybody or a lot of bodies. That's not necessarily true. Now, the possible fallacy with an analogy is called a false analogy. Okay? Where two things you're comparing really aren't that similar. Love is like a spring shower. It brings refreshment to a person's body. Spring showers can also lead to thunderstorms that can kill you. Okay? How far do you take that analogy? People who have to have a cup of coffee every morning before they can function have no less a problem than alcoholics who have to have their alcohol each day to sustain them. No, there is a major difference between alcoholism and caffeine addiction. Okay? And I hear you hear a lot these days that alcoholism is the same as a heroin addiction. And yes, they have some similar tendencies, but there's an order of magnitude in that similarity. Yes, you can argue there are some similarities, but does that apply to all instances? Okay? I had a friend of mine, an acquaintance, let's not say a friend, who was an alcoholic, abused cocaine. Well, he was a cocaine addict, and he smoked 2 packs a day for like 20 years. And he used to like to tell people, he said, I kicked cocaine was, kicking cocaine was easy. I got off of alcohol and got that done, but man, stopping cigarettes was hard. So addictions aren't always the same. So you got to be careful. That would be a false analogy. And then when it comes to I did not include that in my notes. Okay, then you can have false generalization. I don't have that. We're going to skip that one. You won't be accountable for it. All right, some other fallacies. Okay? Some other false arguments. So we've talked about hasty generalization. We've talked about the false analogy. There is the false authority. Just because someone's popular doesn't make them smart. Okay? There is a person who normally does, she's an influencer. I'm assuming that's a full-time job. And she was hawking, selling, advocating, influencing for, I don't know what words, it was a paid endorsement for a nutritional supplement that the FDA had already said was caused ulcers in your colon. I mean, it's just horrible. But she was paid to provide, and there's no regulation on influencers or what they can and cannot advertise. But why does someone who has a makeup, vlogs about makeup and beauty, what makes them smart enough to tell you about what kind of nutritional supplements you can take? What gives a country music singer the authority to tell you who to vote for Senate in a state they don't even live in, which happened in 2018? Again, this whole job of an influencer, you need to be very careful about what authority these people are speaking with. Okay? There's an argument ad hominem. Make sure I always misspell homonym. An argument ad hominem literally means an argument on the man or an attack on the person. Okay? There was a United States senator who will remain nameless, but it was Strom Thurmond, from here in South Carolina, that when a woman with a PhD came in and testified before his committee, all he had to say in his mind to rebut her opinion was, "I'm not taking the word of some blonde lady," and that was it. He didn't care to talk about her arguments. He didn't care about talking about anything else. He made a comment on her appearance and her gender, and that was it. Okay? We all the time hear this about how certain people are not qualified or cannot speak on certain topics simply because of something that, hey, you're from Alabama. What do you know? Okay? I've heard that my entire life, as I'm sure you have from South Carolina. Okay? And the last one, okay, an appeal to tradition. This is the one we hear more than any other, I think. We've always done it that way. Why would we ever change? All right? Reasoning, just because we've always done something, A, we're assuming it was done well in the past, which is not something that we should always assume. And B, we're assuming that nothing's changed since we started whatever it was we were doing originally. Okay? So, real quick, running back over those again, there was the hasty generalization. The fallacies are the hasty generalization, the false analogy, an appeal to false authority, the argument ad hominem, and an appeal to tradition. Okay? All right, so let's talk about some obstacles. To persuasion. All right, the first obstacle we want to talk about is selective perception. Okay, selective perception. We can't absorb all stimuli that we're exposed to. It's impossible. There's just too much of it. So we filter out a lot of the data that that disagrees with the way we're see it. So I used to work with a guy when I was up in the D.C. metro area. And he was one of those guys that was constantly talking about the people in the inner city were lazy. They just didn't work. There's no reason. We paid for everything. He was, there was certainly a certain amount of veiled racism in it. But he was just constantly, these people that are on welfare really have a better life than you think they do. So we happened to, through a series of circumstances, wind up driving together to a Baltimore Orioles game. Now, when the Baltimore Orioles played at Old Memorial Stadium, you had to drive through some of the worst neighborhoods in Baltimore to get up there. And at that time, in the late 80s, that was some of the worst neighborhoods in the country. I mean, Baltimore was in the middle of a major drug war. City crews did not go to certain neighborhoods, and we were driving right through the middle of those neighborhoods. And I was driving, and after we went through a long stretch of really inner city tough, it was where The Wire was, is the best way to explain it. Watch The Wire if you want to know what it was like. I looked at him and said, "Hey, listen, you still stick by your opinion that everything in the inner city is great because the government pays for their lives?" And he was going like, "I didn't see anything there that changed my opinion." So I literally hung a U-turn and drove back down through those neighborhoods and pointed out burned out cars that weren't being moved, garbage that wasn't being picked up, city housing projects that weren't being maintained. Really just the hard conditions that these people lived in through no fault of their own, just the fact that that's where they landed socioeconomically. And that the city of Baltimore at that time was so economically deprived, they didn't have any resources to try to help these people. Okay? He chose not to perceive the evidence he was driving by until I forced him to. Okay? Then there is selective recall. That's just we don't remember the things we don't like. Okay? Sometimes we filter it out later. I mean, first time I ran into a Civil War reenactor, it was just like, this is so great. Our grandfathers were more honorable. I'm sitting there going, your grandfathers owned slaves. I'm not really sure what the point was there. I deal with people of my generation that think the 70s and 80s were so fantastic. 90% of culture in the 80s was just awful, okay? But we filter all that out for nostalgic purposes. We also do it all the time as a defense mechanism. Have you ever seen anybody that was in a car accident where they nearly got killed? Even though they never lost consciousness, you'd go back and ask them, so tell me about what happened in the accident. I remember turning the corner, and I remember being in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. Everything in between there, I've completely forgotten. Well, it's just there. They're just maybe filtering it out. But also, we filter out and we don't remember things we don't want to agree with. Okay? All the time, you'll see married couples, and yes, after being married 29 years, we have this conversation all the time where we basically were both at events that we remember in radically different ways. We're not being evil and we're not trying to fight each other. That's just the way people are. People recall things differently, and we have a tendency to bend our recollections to our prior existing attitudes. There's selective exposure. Okay? When somebody just gets up and leaves a conversation, we are more likely to expose ourselves to information that we already agree with. And selective exposure is really running rampant in our news media today. Fox, MSNBC, CNN, One America Network, where people, when they don't get what they want from their news, they go to another news channel to get what they want, to get somebody to report the news in a way that agrees with them. Okay? There's the degree of commitment. Okay? The degree of commitment is if I have staked something valuable on my opinion, I am not going to back away from it under any circumstances. And the best example I can give you are the anti-vaxxers, the people who are opposed to vaccinating their children. There was a survey that the National Institute of Health did, I think in 2011 or 2012, where they gave parents who were opposed to vaccinating their children direct scientific evidence showing that A, there was no harm associated with vaccines, B, again, scientific studies that showed that measles, mumps, all those diseases still existed and killed a large number of children every year throughout the world. And what they found out was that the parents not only did it not convince them or change their attitudes, it actually hardened their attitudes in the other direction. I had an acquaintance that was an anti-vaxxer for a long time until one of her group, son got the measles and nearly died. And she then took her children in to get vaccinated, and she said she wept through the whole thing because what she had done and made an ill-informed decision and put her children's life on the line. So it was very hard for her to step back away from that because that involved admitting that she had done something that in her new opinions said that she had been risking the lives of her children for her ideas. And that was very difficult. That involved a degree of commitment that it was very hard for her to walk away from. And then there's public commitment. I have a neighbor who was a very, very, well, he may still be, I don't know, I don't talk to him that much anymore, who was a very, very strong supporter of Donald Trump in the 2016 presidential election. He used to seek me out. We had some things in common. He was a veteran. He worked over Fort Gordon. We had some things in common. He's an Auburn graduate like I am. And he used to seek me out to have conversations about Donald Trump. And needless to say, we didn't agree on a whole lot. I respect his opportunity to have those opinions. He did come at me. He wasn't just, I don't like Hillary, so I like Donald. That's not what he was. He had reasoned arguments. He was very proactive. I won't say aggressive. He was very proactive. But then as time went on, I kept asking him questions. After Donald Trump became president, I would ask him questions about some of the decisions he was making. And he just kept, just kept walking away from it, wouldn't talk about it. And I just looked at him one day and I said, hey, listen, let me ask you a question. If you had not so publicly supported him, would you be backing away from him at this point in your life? And he just sort of stared at me for a minute, and he just turned around and walked off. I thought it was a fair question. I always give people never hold anybody at fault for actually changing their mind. That's the way I've changed many of my opinions over time. But because he had been so public in stating his opinions, even if he had seen evidence that would completely contradict it, would make it very hard for him to walk away from that. Okay? And that's how these obstacles work. Again, selective perception. You don't take in stimuli that disagrees with your ideas. Selective recall. You bend or change or just eliminate memories that disagree with you. Selective exposure. You don't allow yourself to be around. And this is different from selective perception. Selective perception is you're there to expose to the stimuli. You just don't process it. This is where you physically remove yourself from gaining the knowledge. Degree of commitment is your personal stake in it and what you were willing to risk. With your opinions and public commitment, very similar statements in public supporting that. Okay, so let's jump into how to persuade people. Okay? All right, first, build a case with evidence and reason and logic. I would like to tell you that always works, okay? Make your argument relevant to the audience. Use the strongest argument you have and focus on it if there is a high personal relevance in the audience. If relevance is anyway, repeat your arguments often. Use internal summaries. Say, hey, listen, okay. So my first main point was the problem we're having. Our second main point is the solution to the problem. Now we're going to talk about, don't just transition. Keep rebuilding your case and keeping it fresh in their minds. The next one we're going to call foot in the door. That's where you ask for a single concession that is not your end state. Get approval for your smallest requests first. The initial request should commit the person to future commitments. Another person may be more successful in making that second request. So, hey, listen, I need $400,000 to $500,000 to bring all the HVAC systems in all the high schools in Aiken County up to speed. Okay, if I go to the school board and say, hey, listen, I need $500,000, you're going to laugh me out of the room. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask for $60,000 to get the HVAC system at Midland Valley High School up to speed. And then I'm going to do some more, I'm going to tell the school board, then I'm going to do some more investigations to see what we need for the other schools. And so the school board says, okay, we'll give you $60,000. Then I come back and say, hey, Silver Bluff, we're going to need another $55,000 for that one. Well, okay, there's $55,000. Okay, listen, we've already invested $95,000. I need another $60,000 to do Aiken High School. And then it just continues to roll along. Okay, foot in the door works if you know you're going to be able to come back and re-persuade and ask for more later on. Similar to foot, the opposite of foot in the door is door in the face. And we have all done this because we are now where we have been teenagers. Ask for something you're not going to get and then back down to show that you are willing to compromise. Hey, Mom, Dad, John's having a party over at his house Saturday night. It's his birthday. It's going to be a big deal. Word is it's going to break up. He's written a couple of movies, and so we're going to be there till about 1:30. So can my curfew be extended from like 10 to 2? Would that be a problem? Would you guys be okay with that? No? All right, so 11:30. I mean, that sounds, okay, fine. If you're going to be that unreasonable, can we talk about 11:30? In which case your parents go, well, 11:30, maybe that sounds better. 11:30, okay. Okay. And your parents may have well said, no, 10 o'clock is your curfew. That's the way my parents were. I tried that door in the face a couple of times. Didn't work. I tried the foot in the door a couple of times. My curfew was not negotiable. But door in the face is where you go in and you say, hey, listen, I need $400,000 to fix up all the air conditioners at all the high schools in Aiken County. So can I get $400,000? And the school board goes, we don't have $400,000. Fine. Can I get $60,000 to fix Midland Valleys? $60,000, we can afford that. And they go, well, yeah, $60,000, we can afford that. Okay? So that's door in the face, where you ask for more than you expect to get, so that you can show that you're willing to compromise. Okay? Okay? Show that your ideas are in line with existing attitudes. Okay, what's something we all agree on as Americans is that veterans are good people and we need to help our veterans. Okay? I worked for a veterans nonprofit over in Augusta for about a year. And one of my jobs was to look at people that, that when they came in and they said, hey, we want to put the logo of your group, your nonprofit, on our things that says your organization supports our plan. And we would generally listen to them, because usually, let's be honest, that logo, if we said, yeah, you can use our logo, there would be some money that would come into our organization as a result of it. We didn't, I made very sure that we didn't sell the logo. But, the fact of the matter is, nonprofits need donations. But there would be people that would come in and ask us for support and just tag, and this will help veterans in the community, at the end of the paragraph with no correlation whatsoever. The one I remember was somebody who was trying to get a permit to build an industrial park over in Richmond County. And they wanted us to endorse it. And there was going to be a pretty good check associated with the endorsement. But when I read through it, I said, you keep saying that this will benefit the veterans community. How is it going to benefit the veterans community? And they said, oh, veterans can get jobs at the people who bring their businesses to our industrial park. And I'm going to say, great. So are you going to have some sort of requirement that the people who rent from you, lease properties, have to hire a certain percentage of veterans? He goes, oh, no, we can't do that. Okay, well, is your maintenance staff going to be, a certain percentage of veterans hired? He goes, no, we can't do that either. Well, then what does that mean then, that it's going to be? Well, veterans can apply for the jobs just like anybody else. They were appealing to the value system, okay, the attitudes, that if it's good for veterans, people will go along with it. And just by asking a couple of questions, I realized that they were lying. Okay, they were just trying to get using that as a persuasive technique. Okay, so the second is to appeal to an alternative set of attitudes or value system. Okay, one of the most successful bills ever concerning global warming or global climate change to get through the House and to be signed by the President of the United States was this bill that gave a grant to people who were producing solar power units. And the tax break that you get if you put solar power units on your house. The people in the House and the Senate weren't necessarily convinced that it was going to be great for the environment, great for for slowing down global climate change. But the people who brought it forward said, hey, listen, it's going to mean more jobs. It's going to mean a better economy. So they sold it not as an environmental bill, but they sold it as a jobs bill. And it went through in a heartbeat. Okay? Is global climate change bad? Well, if you believe it exists, yeah, but not everybody believes it exists, apparently. So they went a completely different way and appealed to an alternative set of attitudes or an alternative value premise. Okay? Now, the last two we're going to talk about. Very tricky. Okay? Going to put them in a separate category. All right, now you can put them over here. Can you see that on the camera? Yeah. Okay, 1. Offer a reward. Saw an interview with the marketing executive that first came up with the idea of a rebate on cars. Okay, buy this car now and we'll give you $800. Okay, and it seemed like a good idea at the time, and it became a very effective marketing tool for that company. Here was the problem. What happened, and what's the natural outgrowth of giving somebody a reward for doing something? The next time you do it, they're going to want a reward. Okay, in fact, there comes a point where they're not going to do it if you don't give them the reward. And then once they get used to getting that reward, not only are they not going to do it if you don't give them the reward, they're not going to do it if you don't give them a bigger reward. And so what the car industry found out very, very quickly was that once people got used to the idea of getting a rebate, of getting some sort of money back, they were not going to buy a car unless there was some sort of money back offer associated with it, some sort of a rebate. And that hung around it's still hanging around today. Now, what the car manufacturers have done is they just raise the manufacturer's suggested retail price and charge you more. But you now see a growing number of car dealers that are now saying, hey, listen, we'll give you the flat rate. There's no rebates. There's no nothing. We'll just tell you how big the check you need to bring in is. And that is apparently being very effective. Okay. The next one is to arouse fear. Okay? We use fear to persuade all the time. I'm not going to tell you that it's bad. Okay? It's just in a separate category than all these others. These are all things you can use all the time. We use fear all the time. I mean, if you've been a parent, you've aroused fear. Don't touch the stove. You will burn your hand off. Okay? That's using fear to arouse, to persuade. Don't talk to strangers. Don't run out into the street. You'll get killed. Okay? We use fear all the time to persuade people. But here's the problem with that. With a child, it's one thing. But fear is, remember when we talked about performance apprehension, and I told you that performance apprehension would attenuate? Okay? Eventually it will go away. Fear is the same way. So if you're going to persuade people, you're just going to have to continue to ratchet up the fear. Okay? In the 1960s, I was very young, but I still remember this, where certain Southern politicians kept ratcheting up the fear of desegregation, and some of the things they said were truly horrendous. In ratcheting up that fear, they didn't tell people to go out and lynch people, but that's naturally the extension of it. Pretty soon you ratchet up that fear so high that by continuing, again, you can't let that fear attenuate, because then people begin to question your previous persuasions. So they have to continue to ramp up that fear until, one of the natural consequences is people get murdered. Okay? And that has happened repeatedly in history. And there are people that will say that's even happening today. So we have to be very, very careful about arousing fear. Coronavirus, COVID-19, good example. What's the fine line between creating panic and trying to get the population prepared for a pandemic? Well, there's no easy, solid, 100% right answer for that. But again, eventually, if you're going to arouse fear, you then sooner or later turn to coercion. That fear becomes a threat. Okay? So you have to be aware of that. All right? So, two main styles of a persuasive speech. Okay? So those are arguments you can use. We're now going to go to styles you can use. So there's two styles. They're really simple. Okay? There's the one-sided persuasive speech. And the two-sided. The one-sided persuasive speech is going to be used as just your side. Just your arguments. Okay? The one-sided is best to use when the audience is predisposed to you or to your side, okay? Where the members of the audience are ill-informed or poorly educated. On your topic, okay? When the audience has to commit immediately. Okay, we see this all the time when evangelists are sitting there saying, you got to give me the money now because I got to go out and save souls now, so give me your money. Now, I mean, if you need somebody to sign a petition right then and there, you need to give a one-sided persuasive speech. And finally, when comprehension is important, keep it simple. The two-sided persuasive speech is given when the audience is well informed on the topic they're predisposed against you, or they're going to be future counter-persuasion. Okay? And the two-sided persuasive speech would go something like this. Hey, folks, I know that you've heard before. You had somebody come in here last week to tell you about why using fertilizer in the CSRA is fine because it just runs off into the river. And they say that's no big deal. It all flows downstream out to the Atlantic Ocean and everybody's fine. Well, I'm going to tell you something, and that's they can say that all they want. In fact, they probably cited these studies, and then you feed back their evidence. Use the exact evidence they did if you can. He said, but listen, I'm here today to tell you something different, and I'm going to convince you by the end of the day that we're not going to use those same fertilizers anymore, okay? So it's a good way to acknowledge, like we said, acknowledge previous speakers, okay? Listen, and it's also good to go, hey, listen, next week I understand there's a guy from the Farm Bureau coming in here that's going to tell you a whole bunch of stuff about how great fertilizer is. But let me tell you what he's going to say right off the bat, okay? And then you lay out his argument and you go, now, that's his opinion. But let me give you some facts. No, well, he's going to bring in facts too. But by calling it an opinion, you've already started to denigrate his argument. And that way, and I have seen this work very well, where if you give them the right information, okay, the audience will start arguing with the future, with someone who's coming in to counter-persuade. One thing to remember about the two-sided persuasive speech, your side always goes last. Your side always goes last because people are going to remember what they heard last. It's a simple psychological principle. People are going to remember what they heard last. Okay? So in a one-sided persuasive speech, it's only your ideas because the audience is predisposed to your arguments. They are ill-informed on the subject. They need to commit immediately, and comprehension is most important. The two-sided is if the audience is well-informed on the topic, they're predisposed against you, or there will be future counter-persuasion. And in the two-sided persuasive speech, your ideas, or the side you're on, always goes last. Okay. Got to throw in one more thing before we get to the punchline on all of this. And we're going to talk a little bit about something called cognitive dissonance. Okay, it's something you need to be aware of if you're going to be persuading people. Okay, this was developed by French psychologists in the 1950s. We're made uncomfortable by two ideas that are in perceived conflict when we feel like we should agree with both. In the extreme, this can cause mental health issues. Okay, but it can work as a persuasive tool, but it takes significant investment. the target will resolve the dissonance. That's like, the target will resolve the dissonance by siding with a long-held belief. Okay, saying, I've got people that are on the fence on an issue. Okay? I love football, and I do. This is true. This is actually true for me. I love football, but I hate CTE. Traumatic brain injuries and repetitive traumatic brain injuries. So I am in conflict when I watch football. I'm in conflict. Now, my way of reasoning my way out of it is I only watch college football now because I still have that perception that at least they give them a chance to get an education so they can have jobs outside of the athletic field. I don't watch the NFL anymore because even though I love football, I don't like to think about the fact that every time there's a hit, somebody just got a concussion. Okay? So, you need to find a long-held belief. Okay? And by attaching this long-held belief to one side of that dissonance, it can be resolved. All right? Mary and Jim are in love. Mary is a devout Christian, and that forms the core of her identity. When she says she wants to get married in a church, she learns that Jim is an atheist. Mary has cognitive dissonance. She both loves the baby Jesus, and she loves her Jim. Okay? Ben Franklin, another famous story, Ben Franklin, when he was living in Philadelphia, there was a person who absolutely hated him, but he needed him politically. He needed him to agree with him. He needed him to side with him in an argument. And he had heard that this individual loved a book. And he had read it many, many times, and he was absolutely passionate about this book. So Ben Franklin just happened to have a conversation with him, just sort of threw out into the conversation. I've been hearing about this book that's very good, and I've been trying to find a copy of it, but it doesn't seem to be around. So although I really want to read it, I haven't really been able to find a copy. Well, this person who did not like him, and to be honest with you, frankly, even said he didn't like him either. But this person who did not like Ben Franklin said, well, I have a copy of the book. And he said, Franklin said, can I borrow it from you? And the person said, well, sure. And he gave him the book. Well, Franklin had already read the book many times himself. He did not need to borrow the book. In fact, he owned a copy of the book. But he then went back after a couple of weeks and gave the book back to the owner, this person who was predisposed against him, and said, hey, listen, this is a fantastic book. I love this book. Thank you for loaning it to me. And this other individual, suddenly he's got this cognitive dissonance that, he has to deal with Ben Franklin. I mean, he both does not like him personally, but here he is. He's attached himself to this book that he loves. And Ben Franklin said that it resolved in Franklin's favor because the guy could not continue to hate Franklin. It became in his mind he could not continue to hate Franklin and continue to like this book. Okay? So you're going to, and that works with a two-sided persuasive speech. One of the arguments in your two-sided persuasive speech when you're presenting your ideas is to make sure that you attach those ideas to something in the audience. See, we're going back to audience analysis. All this works together. Okay? We're going back to audience analysis where if you know the audience, if you're talking to a hunting and fishing club, okay, and you're talking about, but they're also farmers, man, you got to attach their love of the outdoors and their love of fishing and their love of hunting to your ideas, and so that they can resolve that cognitive dissonance and fully and totally agree with you. Okay? All right, last thing. The last thing in every persuasive speech is a call to action. Call to action. Okay? Previously in our speeches, we've had a closing thought at the end of our speeches. In your conclusion, you have your restatement of your purpose. You have a review of your main points, and then you've had a closing thought. Now, in your persuasive speech, you have to have a call to action. For this class, a lot of times I have what I call informative speeches. They're not persuasive, you know. It's like, I'm going to tell you why you should adopt dogs instead of buy dogs from someone. And yeah, it's a really good informative speech, but you don't really persuade us to do anything. So your call to action has got to be a physical action for us to participate in. Okay? Something for us to go out and do. A place for us to go to adopt a dog. A place for us to adopt a cat. A free spaying clinic to cut down on the the stray pet population. You have to give us something to do. All right? Everybody, I'm going to say that again because persuasive intent is going to be a big deal. And I will explain that later when we review the rubric for this next speech. But it has to be an action, not an idea. So now you know why you should. No. This is not going to be about knowing. This is going to be going outside your house and doing a physical action. And you're going to have that built into your speech if you want the maximum grade allowable. Okay? Call to action instead of closing thought. Okay? All right. So that wraps us up. That's the lecture for today on persuasion. Again, shoot me an email if you have any questions. You should all have my email. If not, it's on the Blackboard side. In the documents, it's on our syllabus. Let me know if you have any questions. And until then, I will see you around.